Are you seriously trying to teach people how to shoot? Using a stance that's completely wrong? The voice cut through the range, firm, decisive, asking no permission. Jason Miller. A young instructor walked straight up to lane 7 and stopped directly in front of Caleb Ward. Stop. Right now. What you're doing goes against every modern training doctrine. That stance is outdated, dangerous, and completely unusable in any real defensive situation. Caleb didn't respond. He simply lowered the pistol, engaged the safety, and stood still. Jason continued, his tone confident, as if reading straight from a manual. Today we teach shooting to people who are fully mobile, standing upright, both arms extended. And whatever it is you're doing, that belongs in a museum. A few quiet chuckles rose from behind them. People nearby stopped what they were doing and began to watch. Jason crossed his arms. You can keep going if you want, but don't call that skill. Caleb looked up for the first time. His voice was low and slow, not defensive. I'm just asking to finish this magazine. A moment of silence swept across the range. No one said anything else. If you believe that true courage doesn't come from what's taught inside a training room, but from what's learned after the price has already been paid. Subscribe to Service Honor Stories so we can preserve the memory, dignity, and respect owed to our quiet heroes. Caleb didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't bow his head. He lowered the pistol in a familiar motion, slow, deliberate, precise. His finger came off the trigger. The safety clicked on clean and quiet, as if it were a reflex repeated over countless years in moments where mistakes were not an option. Then he stood still. Not in defiance, not in defense. Just standing. Caleb's left arm hung close to his side. It didn't move. It didn't rise. It didn't adjust or search for a more comfortable position. It had stiffened like a part of the body that had learned to accept its own limits that needed no explanation and no concealment. Jason saw it. So did the crowd. But no one said a word. Caleb lifted his eyes. His gaze was calm to the point of being unsettling. No anger, no wounded pride. Nothing that resembled a man being insulted. In those eyes there was no question of why, no need to be understood, only the stillness of someone long accustomed to being judged by people who had never stood where he stood. A few people nearby began to shift. No one laughed anymore. No one spoke. That silence made them uneasy. Arguments are easier to manage. A comeback can be challenged. An explanation can be picked apart. But silence offers nothing to grab onto. Jason opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wasn't sure what to say next. Caleb remained where he was. Back straight, his weight evenly distributed with just the slightest lean, as if he had learned to always prepare for the possibility of losing balance. It wasn't the stance of a performer. It was the stance of someone who always left himself a way out. You don't have anything to say? Jason asked, his voice lower than before. Caleb shook his head almost imperceptibly. No need. 2 short words carrying no rebuttal. Yet their simplicity made the air heavier. They forced the listener to confront his own question: if the man didn't need to explain himself, what made anyone so certain he was wrong? Someone behind them cleared his throat, then fell silent again. Caleb didn't look toward the crowd. He looked straight ahead toward the target still hanging there, not yet brought back. It felt like an unfulfilled promise or a truth waiting to be called forward. But he wasn't in a hurry. He never had been. Some people learn patience in classrooms. Others learn it when time stretches between heartbeats. Caleb was the latter. Jason shifted to the side almost unconsciously, opening a small space. No one told him to do it. Instinct took over, the instinct of someone realizing he was standing in front of something that couldn't be handled by a training manual. The silence continued. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it held every pair of eyes in place. Caleb drew in a slow breath. His right shoulder rose slightly. His left arm remained still. No sign of pain, no complaint, just a body that had learned how to live with what it had lost. He dipped his head very slightly, not to ask permission, but like a habit formed before finishing something he had already begun. No one gave an order. No one tried to stop him. And in that moment, when every voice had gone quiet, when no one was laughing and no one quite believed, yet the truth began to find its way forward, not through words, but through the action that was about to follow. Just then another voice came from behind him, still carrying the warmth of mockery, and the silence shattered instantly into a fresh cutting wound. It was from that very pause, when Caleb remained motionless and no one was laughing out loud anymore, that the confidence of those around him began searching for words to fill the empty space. Jason cleared his throat and stepped half a pace forward, as if trying to reclaim control. "This is where we teach the isosceles stance," he said, his voice firm and clear, needing no one's approval. Square to the target, both arms fully extended, stable center of gravity. That's the most basic foundation of modern marksmanship. As he spoke, he demonstrated with his own body like an instructor lecturing a familiar class. There was no malice in Jason's tone, only the certainty of someone who believed he was standing for what was right. Every sentence carried the same implication. Anything different was wrong. Caleb still didn't respond. He stood there unmoving, his expression unchanged. Jason continued, this time no longer looking at Caleb, but turning toward the people around them, as if seeking agreement. What we teach here is based on research, based on efficiency, based on what's been proven. A young man behind them let out a quiet laugh. Guess he's watched too many old movies. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough for a few others to join in. No one laughed directly at Caleb. They laughed sideways, laughed in passing, laughed as if it were just a harmless remark. That was what made the humiliation more refined. Jason didn't stop it. He didn't encourage it either. He let it happen. Another person tilted his head, staring at Caleb's left arm. His arm doesn't fully extend. Another laugh followed, this one clearer, not cruel, but loud enough for the target of it to hear. Caleb felt the stares. He knew exactly where they were looking, but he didn't hide it. He didn't pull his arm in tighter. He didn't turn away to avoid it. He left it exactly where it was, like a truth that didn't need correcting. Jason turned back to Caleb. See, he said, his voice lower now, but sharper. With that kind of mobility limitation, you really shouldn't be using outdated stances. We teach people to shoot in order to protect themselves, not to preserve old habits. The word old was emphasized. It wasn't just about technique, it was about the man himself. Caleb blinked once, no reaction, no change in expression. By now, the crowd was fully engaged. They were no longer accidental witnesses. They had become part of the judgment. Some nodded along with Jason. Others stayed silent, but their eyes spoke for them. The humiliation no longer needed direct words. It spread through glances, quiet chuckles, half-joking comments. It pushed Caleb downward, not through force, but through unspoken consensus. Jason added one final remark as if to conclude the matter. You can shoot however you like. We're not stopping you. But don't call that a standard. The words landed softly but with weight. They placed Caleb outside the boundary of what was considered acceptable. They turned him into an example of what not to learn from. Caleb lowered his gaze for the briefest moment. Not out of shame, but as if weighing whether there was anything left to say. Then he looked up again. His eyes were still calm. Another young man muttered to his friend quietly, but not quietly enough. He's probably just fallen behind the times. This time Jason heard it. He didn't object. He stayed silent. That silence coming from the person with authority became permission. Caleb drew in a slow breath. His chest rose and fell steadily. No sign of anger, no sign of agitation, yet it was that very calm that began to unsettle some in the crowd. Because if he were truly wrong, he should have reacted. But he didn't. And in that moment when Caleb was pushed to his lowest point, when every gaze had grown accustomed to seeing him as outdated as an irrelevant exception, what no one realized was this: they had unknowingly created the perfect space for the reversal that was about to come. No one could say exactly when it happened, but the rhythm of the range began to slow. Scattered conversations faded. Half smiles disappeared. Glances that had once passed over Caleb with quiet disdain now lingered longer, slower, as if something had shifted without anyone being able to name it. No one argued anymore. No one offered further explanations. The earlier noise dissolved, leaving behind a strange, unsettled void. Caleb was still standing there. He didn't step forward. He didn't step back. His presence began to separate itself from the crowd, not because he raised his voice or did anything unusual, but because everyone around him gradually realized they were all looking in the same direction. There are moments when people stop judging and simply observe. Those moments usually arrive late, after every assumption has already been spoken. One young man crossed his arms. Another lowered his voice. No one was laughing anymore. Caleb lowered his gaze to the pistol in his hands as if checking something familiar, not a mechanical inspection. Not preparing a performance. Just an old habit of someone who always finishes what he starts no matter how many eyes are watching. He lifted his head, his voice low and even, carrying no trace of challenge. Let me finish this magazine. Just one sentence, no apology, no explanation. The words didn't ask for permission yet. They carried enough respect to force consideration. They weren't meant to persuade. They drew a clear line. This is what he will do if no one stops him. Jason looked at Caleb. Then he looked at the people around them. In that moment, he was no longer an instructor delivering a lesson. He stood between two choices: end the situation right here, or allow it to continue and reveal itself. A flicker of hesitation crossed Jason's face, not because he doubted his training doctrine, but because he began to understand that stopping this now would make him responsible for what had not yet happened. He nodded, a very small nod. Not approval, just permission. Go ahead. Jason said, his tone neutral. Let's see. The words carried an unspoken thought that many understood let him prove himself wrong. No more debate. No more words. Just results. Caleb returned the nod. There was no sign of relief. No hint of satisfaction. He didn't see this as a chance to strike back. To him, it was simply the remainder of something unfinished. The crowd stepped back without being told. The distance wasn't large, but it was enough to leave Caleb standing alone in the center of attention. No mocking glances, no whispered remarks, only waiting. Some people realized only then that they had been holding their breath. Others noticed their hands had gone still. Attention converged not because anyone demanded it, but because everyone sensed that turning away now would mean missing something. No one knew exactly what, but instinct told them to stay. Caleb adjusted his stance slightly. No showmanship, no excess, just a quiet reorganization of his body to work the way it always had. His left arm remained motionless, his right hand held firm, his shoulder angled just enough to ease the strain on a body that no longer moved as it once did. Jason watched. For the first time, he wasn't looking for a mistake. He was looking to understand. The silence no longer felt confrontational. It became a kind of unspoken respect, an acknowledgement that what was about to happen deserved to be witnessed fully uninterrupted by words. Caleb drew in a slow breath, then let it out. No one gave a signal. No one counted down. The moment stretched longer than a heartbeat, long enough for every earlier judgment to recede, making room for a single question hanging in every mind present. What if he isn't wrong after all? And just as that anticipation reached its tightest point, Caleb tightened his grip with his right hand, brought the pistol back to its familiar position, and prepared for the action that would force everyone into absolute silence. Go ahead, Jason said, his voice carefully neutral. No one's stopping you. Caleb gave a very slight nod. Thank you. He raised the pistol in the same stance everyone had just called wrong. No adjustment for appearance. No change to please anyone. He's still using that stance, someone murmured. He's not going to correct it, another whispered. Caleb didn't respond to any of it. He spoke only once, just loud enough for those closest to hear, I'll shoot slow. The first shot rang out, unhurried, unforced. Jason frowned. He's not snapping the trigger, he muttered almost to himself. That cadence. It's too slow. Caleb continued. Don't count, he said evenly. Watch. The second shot, then the third, each one spaced evenly like breathing. He's not shooting to prove a point, someone whispered. He's shooting like he's working. Jason crossed his arms, but his eyes had changed. Keeping that kind of stability with one hand, he said, no longer hiding his surprise. That's not simple. Caleb spoke again without turning around. I don't need fast. I need hits. A younger man blurted out, but that stance. Jason raised a hand. Wait. Caleb fired the final shot, then lowered the weapon, engaged the safety. I'm done, he said. You can bring the target back. Silence fell. No laughter, no commentary. When the target came in, Jason saw it first. He leaned forward, then straightened. That's not possible, he murmured. Someone else stepped closer, then another. The grouping, center mass. Too tight. At this distance, that's not luck. Jason took a deep breath. The results... He paused as if choosing each word carefully. Can't be denied. Caleb kept his eyes forward. He didn't smile. He didn't savor the moment. He spoke low, brief, precise. The stance you teach isn't wrong. Jason looked up immediately. What do you mean? Caleb turned his head for the first time since he started shooting. But it assumes something. What Jason asked quicker now, Caleb answered without hesitation, that the person standing in front of the target is still intact. A few people held their breath. Jason blinked. Can you explain that? Caleb looked down at his left arm, then back up. That stance assumes both arms function, that the body can still balance itself, that the shooter hasn't already paid a price. Jason was silent. This time he didn't argue. Someone in the crowd said quietly, he's talking about being wounded. Caleb nodded. Yes. Jason stepped forward. So you're saying, what we teach isn't enough? Caleb shook his head. No, it's just not complete. No one laughed anymore. No one dared to. Authority in the room had begun to shift, though it hadn't fully changed hands. Jason was still in charge. The curriculum still stood. But from this moment on, no one would casually call that stance wrong again. Jason studied Caleb for a long time. Where did you learn that? Caleb didn't answer right away. And it was that pause, not hesitation but memory, that opened the door to a truth Caleb had never told anyone here. What does it assume? Jason asked, his voice low, no longer sharp. Caleb answered immediately without a moment's thought, that you've never been shot. The words landed short, direct, not aggressive, yet heavy enough to force those standing closest to reconsider. Jason frowned. You mean... It means the stance you teach, Caleb said, was built for a body that's still intact, for two arms that fully function, for someone who can still stand firm, for a moment when nothing has collapsed yet. He lifted his left arm slightly. Not high, not for long. then let it fall. This arm doesn't fully extend, Caleb said. Not today, and not for a very long time. Jason followed the movement. An injury, Caleb nodded. Yes. Someone in the crowd whispered, he's not pretending. Caleb continued his tone even without self-importance. That stance was designed for people who've lost mobility, for those with only one working arm, for those who can't stay upright for long. He rotated his torso just slightly, to reduce the area exposed to fire, not to look good, but to stay alive. Jason stepped in this time with genuine curiosity. What about balance? Lower it, Caleb replied. So when you're about to fall, you can still shoot, so you don't lose everything just because you lose balance. A pause passed through the room. No laughter. No unnecessary questions. Jason asked again more slowly now. Where did you learn all this? Caleb met his gaze. In war. Another voice spoke cautious. Who are you? Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he said it as if confirming an old settled fact. I used to be a weapons sergeant. Jason froze. Nee. Caleb shook his head. It's not important. When were you wounded? Jason asked. After an engagement, Caleb said. Not the first and not the last. He paused. That time my left arm never worked the same again. The doctor said I'd never shoot again. Someone in the crowd blurted out, and yet, Caleb nodded, and yet I still had to shoot. Because it was my job, and because there were others who needed to learn. Jason blinked. Others. Wounded soldiers, Caleb said. Those who lost an arm, those who lost balance, those the standard curriculum no longer fit. He went on, his voice steady. I helped them find a way to continue, not to win, but to survive. A young voice asked quietly, how did you teach them? With stances like the one you just saw, Caleb replied. Not pretty, not new, but they worked. Jason lowered his head slightly, then looked up. You never said any of this. Caleb answered. No one asked. The short sentence changed the air. Doubt began to fade, replaced by listening. Eyes that once scrutinized now lingered longer, slower, as if trying to remember. Jason drew a breath. What we teach, he began, then stopped, may not account for that situation. Caleb nodded. That's all right. Every curriculum starts from ideal conditions. War doesn't. No one argued. No one laughed. The truth stood in the middle, needing no defense. And as the room shifted from judgment to listening, another question, one not about technique but about responsibility, began to form, preparing to lead everyone toward the lesson Caleb had saved for what came next. Jason stood still for a long moment before speaking. Not because he lacked words, but because he was searching for the right ones. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer the same as before. I'm sorry, Jason said. No detours, no excuses. I judged based on what I saw, based on the curriculum, based on the image I believed a skilled person was supposed to fit. Caleb looked at Jason's. His expression didn't change. He didn't nod right away. He didn't turn away either. Jason continued, his voice dropping. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I didn't ask, and I was wrong. Caleb shook his head slightly. You weren't wrong, he said. You only taught what you were taught. Jason looked up. You mean you did your role correctly? Caleb replied. The curriculum exists for a reason. It helps a lot of people get started. He paused for a beat. But sometimes what looks unusual exists because the circumstances aren't normal. The statement carried no judgment. It sounded like a truth tested long enough to no longer need proof. Those around them fell silent. No one objected. No one needed clarification. Jason nodded. I forgot that he said. Or maybe, I was never taught it. Caleb smiled faintly. Not a victorious smile. Just recognition between two people who had stood on opposite sides of the same issue. No one had lost, no one had won. We all start from the same place, Caleb said. Then life sends each of us in a different direction. Someone stepped forward from the crowd. He was younger, his gait uneven. One prosthetic leg was clearly visible. He stopped a few steps away from Caleb as if careful not to intrude on his space. He began, then stopped. Would you teach me? His voice wasn't shaking, but there was a real hesitation in it, not fear but hope, restrained after too many disappointments. Jason turned to look at the young man. Where were you deployed? He asked. Afghanistan, the young man answered. Lost my leg on the last tour. Caleb glanced down at the prosthetic, then looked back up. Can you shoot? He asked. Not yet, the young man said honestly. At least not the way they teach it. Caleb nodded. Then we can begin. No ceremony, no promises. Just an answer clear enough to let the listener know the door was open. Jason stepped back a single pace. No one asked him to. But he understood that in this moment his role was no longer to stand in the middle. He wasn't losing his place. He was sharing it. I want to learn too, Jason said. If that's okay. Caleb looked at him. All right, he replied. But you'll have to forget a few things before learning something new. Jason nodded. I'm ready. The young veteran let out a long breath as if releasing something he had been carrying for a very long time. He looked at Caleb now without scrutiny but with anticipation, not of a miracle but of a path. Caleb spoke slowly, clearly enough for both of them to hear. We don't learn to go back to who we were. We learn to move forward. No one in the crowd left. No side conversations started. Attention was no longer focused on who was right or wrong, but on what would be passed on. Jason looked around, then back at Caleb. "Thank you," he said, "for not turning away." Caleb replied simply. There was nothing to turn away from. In that moment, what changed wasn't the curriculum and it wasn't authority. What changed was how people looked at one another, shifting from judgment to listening, from proving to sharing. And as those who stayed began to understand that today's lesson didn't end here but would be carried outward, the story moved into another phase, one where legacy began to take shape in silence. Months after that day, the range was no longer the same. Not because the walls had been repainted, not because the rules on the board had changed, but because the people who walked through the doors had changed. A new class was opened. No loud promotion, no slogans on the walls, just a single line in the program list for those who have been wounded, for those who could no longer stand the way they once did, for those who had once believed they no longer had a place in the world of firearms and skill. Jason was the first to sign his name. He didn't stand at the front, he stood beside. He introduced Caleb in a simple voice. No stories of heroics, no talk of the past, only why the class existed. Every session, Jason stayed until the end. He took notes, he asked questions, he listened, and when someone let out a careless laugh, he was the first to restore silence. Caleb came regularly. He didn't call it teaching, he called it sharing. Some days only a few people showed up, other days the room was full. But the way Caleb spoke never changed. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't diminish anyone. He spoke from experience, from limitation, from things no manual ever covered. He taught how to stand when standing was no longer easy, how to shoot when the hand no longer fully opened, how to stay calm when the body betrayed the will. The students listened for a long time. No one rushed, no one bragged. Some had been soldiers, some were police officers, some were simply veterans trying to rediscover the feeling that they were still capable of protecting themselves. Caleb taught until the final days of his life. There was no announcement, no farewell, just one class that ended earlier than usual. Caleb set the pistol down, looked at the people in front of him and said, "That's enough for today." That was the last time. After that, a program bearing his name was created. No long explanations, no grand language, just a course built on what Caleb had left behind. Those who had learned continued to teach it. No additions, no updates to make it fashionable. Only the original spirit remained, learned to continue, not to return. Jason became its strongest protector. He opposed turning it into a commercial product. He refused to place logos or slogans on anything Caleb had left behind. He made it clear to everyone this wasn't a product, it was a responsibility. On the wall where Lane 7 had once witnessed that first silence, a single quote was placed. No decoration, no elaborate frame, just words. There is no wrong stance. Only people who have never had to shoot after being wounded. People who entered often stopped to read it. Some nodded. Some stood quietly for a long time. No one laughed. No one argued. Caleb's legacy wasn't how well he could shoot. It was that he created space for others to exist as they were, without needing to prove anything, without asking permission. Some things don't need to be remembered with applause. They only need to be carried forward. And there, among those who had once been judged, the lowest dignity wasn't granted. It was recognized. If this story makes you believe that honor and kindness never retire, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Service Honor Stories so that none of their memories are ever forgotten. Service Honor Stories. We remember the quiet heroes,